This is Michael Clara. Welcome to another edition of my blog, Local School Boards Can Make a Difference. The title of this blog is Unmasking and Unpacking White Power and Privilege on the Board of Education. And I'm subtitling it a message to Dr. Cunningham because I'm making this and I'm going to send it to her and post it on my blog. But I'm hoping that this is an issue that she can help resolve. At our last board meeting that we just had this past Tuesday, she was there in the audience and saw, some issues unfold that have now caused a lot of questions and concerns for people in the community. And I'm getting a number of calls and messages from people wanting to know, what happened and why it happened. And so I think the first thing I'd like to do is just go ahead and show about 5 minutes of the meeting. And then we can go from there as to why things unfolded the way they did.
Go ahead, Michael.
So my concern, and this is a perfect example, I think, of what's the cause of friction, is that you have employees of the district that are talking about process, and for them the process is good and everything seems to be in order for them on this issue, but in the community it's not. The outcome of this is not. The community has been concerned about this, for sure, since I've been on the board, about the way the police are interacting with students.
Right.
And then when I brought it up here, I think we had a good example going on here, how the police then were misused, in this room.
And I agree with that. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you wait till I'm done? And then I thought we were going to just, do an exchange instead of interrupting each other, right? Because I've been waiting I'm the one that asked for this to be pulled off the consent agenda, and I was waiting for other people, but I can wait if you have something to say.
Go ahead.
So the concern from the community standpoint, if all this movement was going on in the district, I certainly didn't see it. People in the community didn't see it. And that's when we went to the mayor, people in the community, we went to the legislature and got a bill passed. Clearly, people in the West High community didn't see any movement. They went to the courts. And so what's happening from the community standpoint is we're having to go to the courts, go to the legislature to get things changed for our district. And that shouldn't be happening. And so the insult that happens here is, again, this gets put on the consent agenda when people in the community have been working on this issue independent, absent this board, because it looked like this board wasn't concerned about these issues that were mentioned here. And then, I'm part of it. Anyways, my concern is I support what Rosemary's asking for. I think one way for the community to get involved, it's one thing to have bureaucrats decide that this is what they're going to do, but we've left out the community completely. And the concerns that the community had, I think, I have several people that have already sent me notes on what they'd like to see changed in this, so I'm not going to be able to get it done in a meeting. So I'd like to ask that this get sent to the equity leadership team, which is, I don't know if you remember if you were there, but I asked for this a couple months ago that we do that. In this meeting, I asked Mikkel 2 meetings ago, when we were going to deal with this, and he says,
I know the outreach that they have done on this has been massive, and into the communities, into the community of color, and so it surprises me that, and maybe there are a small group of people that are upset, that you're hearing from Michael, and I appreciate that they're reaching out to you. But I do want to honor, that work that the ACLU has done, because they have. I mean, that has been a massive amount of work and research that they have done. And so
Not to mention years of the DMC committee.
Yes, the DMC committee too, that has been working on this. And so, Kelly, so I'm sitting and I'm thinking that, that's kind of a different thing that you're proposing than to pulling it off of the agenda, renegotiating, the MOU, renegotiating the MOU. Or are you saying, is that what you're saying? It sounds to me like you're either saying, bring it back and we can, share some experiences or some information in the sharing piece, but are you actually saying also that you would want to have this renegotiated?
I don't know, because I don't know what the issues could or would
be. Yeah.
And that's why I think it needs to come off.
Okay.
Because it will only take, I mean, if it takes 2 more weeks or we don't look at it till July, I don't see that it's an issue.
And so do
You
you,
cannot predict how long it will take
I
because
agree.
it's already taken much longer than I think
All right, I
Christina
understand
expected.
And
Mike?
we,
Go ahead.
I apologize, and part of the settlement agreement was to work towards this within a certain period of time, so.
right,
So, Mr. Clara.
So this is an example of when people of color in the community talk about white privilege and dominant communities that oppress communities of color, is I'm the only person of color serving on the board. I said, you know, there's communities of color that are concerned about this, people in my community, people that elected me. I mean, I have elementary schools that are 90% ethnic minority, and I'm saying this is a concern. The community did not have input. And then Chrissy turns around and says, no, that's not what, you know, the community of colors, they've had massive input in this.
Michael,
And so,
that's not fair
let me
to
finish,
say
please.
that.
That's exactly what you said.
That's not what you
And
said.
can I speak without being interrupted? I didn't interrupt you, even though I disagree. Can I finish, please? Chrissy? All right, and then, you know, she said that it's a small amount of people that I'm talking to. And that's not the case. And then everybody's ready to move on because the white lady on the board has
All right.
said that
This kind of comment, this kind of personal comment is out of order.
it's not out of order.
It is out of
You're
order.
out of order because you won't even let me talk, and this is the problem.
We have a
See?
motion
All right, then I'll
on the
just leave.
table. We have a
Yeah, 'cause
motion on the table.
No, I'm talking, and just because I'm a person of color and you don't like that,
Because you
you're
are
gonna say I'm out
personally
of order?
insulting other
That's
members of
discriminating.
this,
You're discriminating.
other
Saying that
members
she's
of
white-
this body.
Saying that she's white is insulting? How? Explain that to me. Explain
You
that
know
to me.
perfectly well that
No, I
what you're
don't.
insinuating is.
No, I'm making the distinction
All right.
that when she said it as a white lady, you guys go along with that, but when I say it as a person of color, and then you just exasperate this by saying that I'm out of order for talking about race on a school
I
board?
did not say that.
That's exactly, what did you say then?
I said that you're behaving in a personally insulting way to other members
Okay,
of the
well
board.
then you got a problem, if you think
All
that's
right.
insulting.
We have a motion on the table. Are there?
Ask another?
Yes.
So as I did in the meeting this last Tuesday, you know, I'm speaking my truth. And that's the only way when we talk about privilege on how we're going to change the structure of the school district. When when we talk about privilege, we need to increase awareness, examine privilege, and cultivate community while we do that in order to make change. And it is going to be uncomfortable. We know that. And my message to Dr. Cunningham, who's our new superintendent, as I said, she was there in the audience. I'm hoping that as we come to a new superintendent, that she'll be able to help us address this and eradicate our district of this kind of foolishness. Before we move on, just to give context to what happened at the meeting this past Tuesday, I want to go back to a meeting on April 5th where I have a conversation with Superintendent Withers, who's our current superintendent, and his last month in the district is now. And in a couple of weeks, he won't be here, but he's the one that sets up a lot of the conflict and the friction that we experience now. And again, I'm hoping that changes with the new superintendent.
You're up and provide that.
So, but like in this one, it asks for like a contract to be done between the law enforcement agency and the district, and that would be approved by the board. So do you have a timetable on when that would happen? I mean, the elements of that would be,
Our contract's in place unless the state changes something that's a non-issue for us.
when did the board approve it?
The contract with the Salt Lake Police.
Mm-hmm.
So your employment contract versus your training contract, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well,
Because you enter into contracts with providers every year for all kinds of services.
right. Well, the contract that I know that we're involved with the Salt Lake City Police is a financial one. And then this bill calls for a contract that spells out the roles and responsibilities and things of that nature. And it says that it's approved by the board. And so that's when I'm asking, when do you anticipate that happening?
Not knowing how they're interpreting that, again, I believe you've already done that because approved by the board would mean, does your policy align with the state rule and are the activities then aligned with the policy? So let's find out what the state plans on doing with that and we'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you. So there you saw, in that video where I had asked him specifically, to where were we at with the contract that was specified under a new law that many of us in the community helped to pass in order to address the school to prison pipeline, in the school to prison pipeline, and you heard what he said. But then nothing is said to me about it. It doesn't come up again, and the next I know of it, it comes up on the consent agenda, as you saw at the beginning of this presentation. And this was the superintendent's attorney, Christina Kendall, who was doing a lot of the talking in the video clip that you saw in the beginning of this presentation. And I'm not even now going back and looking, I'm not understanding what her urgency was and why she was opposed to allowing community input. But let me give some definitions to some of the words I use when we talk about white privilege. What is it? It's unearned benefits, rights, and advantages that one receives because of one's race. How does it work? Because it's invisible to those who enjoy it. White privilege grants white people permission to ignore race and thus oppress others. It is enjoyed and experienced most often unconsciously. Why is it useful to whites? It reinforces theory of meritocracy, which is the idea that good things happen to those who deserve it. Work hard, play by the rules, etc. And this all comes from Dr. Peggy McIntosh. She writes that white privilege is unquestioned and unearned set of advantages, entitlements, benefits, and choices bestowed on people solely because they are white. Generally, white people who experience such privilege do so without being conscious of it. And she did a presentation, I think over a decade ago, if not 2 decades ago, about unpacking the invisible knapsack of white privilege. And she ended up with 26 points of a checklist that she says that white people get automatically because based within the context and the definitions that I just shared. And a few of these I'll spell out. Where in number 6, she says, when I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. And again, she's speaking all white people, in her opinion and through research, these are the privileges that they are able to enjoy. She says, I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them. Number 17, I can criticize our government and talk about how much I fear its policies and behavior without being seen as a cultural outsider. 24, I can be sure that if I need legal or medical help, my race will not work against me. She goes on to say that I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness, not in invisible systems conferring dominance on my group. And this is important because I have to admit that before I got on the Board of Education, I was taught this, that racism was an act of meanness from individuals. I had no idea, and I should have, but recognize that it's actually system and organizations also due to the individuals and their short-sightedness. And I see this played out. Unfortunately, I have a front row seat to it, being a member of the Board of Education. In this particular case, as you saw in the meeting, I have another definition that I use in a prior podcast entry. It says systemic racism doesn't simply rear its ugly head, it's voted on, enacted with policies, and used to disenfranchise. And you saw that happen with the board. They voted to approve this contract with the police, even though they were told that community involvement and input was not part of this process, and it should be. Let me say that this all goes back to the issue that happened last year when the board president, as you see here, this was a Trib Talk interview that her and I did, and the title of it is School Board Member Dons Bandito Costume to Protest Police Presence at Meetings.
And this was just, they often say that the school and what happens in the school district is a microcosm of what's happening in the larger society, which is true. And in this case, I protested the police presence when and it says right here, it meant to make me feel like a criminal, because there's other research out there that shows that if you're allowed and I'm thinking of by Michelle Alexander, and I can't remember the title of her book right now, but Professor Alexander talks about that when somebody is labeled a criminal, then we're not obligated to treat them as equals. And you see the subtitle here says, Michael Clara plays a stereotype to show board's bigotry. Board president says officers a result of extreme behavior. And so later on, the Salt Lake Tribune, later in the fall of last year, wrote an op-ed about this, and they said, we do need to address the school to prison pipeline. And they say, so it's possible that Salt Lake City board member Michael Clara had a point over those weeks when he showed up at board meetings attired as the sorry old stereotype of the Mexican bandito. It was a protest, Clara said, of the fact that the board president, Heather Bennett, used a heated conversation, which Bennett said contained some real but unspecified threats, with him as a reason to station the board's usual police presence at the front of the audience. So what ends up happening is, what played out in the boardroom last year is what played out with what has been playing out for the last decade or so within our classrooms, as we have used the police to discipline our students. And we now recognize, the board doesn't, but at least we have a mayor who was just newly elected that definitely recognizes the need to break the school to prison pipeline. We have a new police chief that recognizes the need to break in the school to prison pipeline. And here he is at the board meeting back in April with me, and this is Janetta Williams, the tri-state president of the NAACP here in Utah. And then this is a picture of me and our Attorney General, Sean Reyes, Senator Thatcher, and over here on the left is Chief. He's the chief of Bountiful, but he's also the president of the Police Chiefs Association, who we worked with closely in establishing legislation. And then that legislation was House Bill 460. That because the board at the time was not interested in this issue and addressing it, many of us in the community, and I'll bring follow up in part two, worked with these two legislators to and with language to put in a bill that would create a contract and require local school board to enter into a contract with the local police agency, and it had certain elements in it. And this passed unanimously through the House and the Senate. But then again, we come back to the Board of Education, and they struggle with this. They struggle to include people of color in the conversation. And you see here, even in that contract that the board passed without input from the public, it says in there that we are committed to, that we will provide outreach to parents and the community for stakeholder involvement in problem solving and developing solutions to identified public safety issues. This will enable the police department and the school district to form valuable partnerships. So this is my message to the new superintendent. You were an eyewitness to the fact that our actions do not match our words. That here, because of what an employee, in this case, Christina Kendall, who's the attorney, the superintendent, was telling the board, 4 members of the board voted to pass this in the absence of community input, even though the very document that the 4 members of the board passed was implicit, that we would not only get input, but that we would do outreach, which none of that has occurred. And so I'm just asking the new superintendent to stop, to have an administration that does not participate in this kind of hypocrisy. This is a letter that came to the board on February 2nd by many advocacy groups in the ethnic minority community that want to address the disparity in the district and will continue to address it. These people should have been consulted. or asked, or as we say, outreach should have been done before we agreed to language in this agreement with the police department. And this is Dr. Foley. He points out an interesting thing, that cycles of oppression and privilege. He says the attitude of inferiority and superiority, he says the dominant group is smarter, more talented, more worthy, while the subordinate group are less smart, less talented, less worthy. And this goes back to why I said in the meeting at the end of the video clip that I showed in the beginning, I said, well, all of you are smarter than the community, which is why they had this attitude that they don't need community input. In closing, let me go back to Dr. McIntosh. She says here that one of the items on her list was that as a white person, she says, I can go home for meetings, classes, and conversations and not feel excluded, fearful, attacked, isolated, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, stereotyped, or feared because of the size of my body. And this is very this is a very potent item on her list, because the opposite applies to me. And I understand this point of her list is that she enjoys this as a privilege, and as a person of color, I don't. And I'd have to say that I'm almost inclined to say that this is the first time in my life that I have had that I've been dealt with in this manner because of the color of my skin. And the sad part of this is that even though it's the first time in my life, I know people in my neighborhood that deal with this kind of white privilege constantly. And this is what our kids deal with in an educational setting, which is why they check out and why we use the term in the communities of color, push out instead of drop out. And this is something we need to work on together to change. I just got done reading a book called Killing Rage, Ending Racism by Bell Hooks. And she says, one of the quotes in the book is, she says, we must show the way. There must exist a paradigm, a practical model for social change that includes an understanding of ways to transform consciousness that are linked to transform structures. While it is important that individuals work to transform their consciousness, it is important for us to remember that the struggle to end white supremacy is a struggle to change a system, a structure. And I would add an organization, in this case, the organization of the school district. She says, fundamentally, it is our collective responsibility as people of color and as white people to construct models for social change, to abdicate that responsibility, to suggest that change is just something an individual can do on his or her own, or in isolation with other racist white people, is utterly misleading. So I'll continue some more information in part 2, but this is part 1 of my message to the new superintendent. I'm glad that you were there at this last meeting where you could be an eyewitness to the friction that occurs because we have staff members that are misinforming board members. And I'm hoping that if nothing else, you can change that and ensure that the members of the administration of the school district provide the board members accurate information so that we can make informed votes on an issue. Thank you.